Welcome to Writing the Wrong Way, where we talk about how writing works, how writers work, and how the best writers risk being strange. And I've got a rapper as a writer here. I'm really pleased about this because I've been trying to get a rapper to come on for a while. And also, I finally got a rapper who I'm a big fan of, Bazooka Joe 204, who is also previously known as John Smith. And I've followed your stuff pretty near since you came out, maybe just a little bit after you came out. I kind of started to get into the PNC, Penis and Corn crew and all of the different people associated with that. After I, had moved to Winnipeg and started to kind of, get plugged into the indie music scene a little bit here. And so Joe, or formerly John Smith, has been really just doing it for a long time, either as John Smith or as in sort of super groups, I guess you'd call them, like hip hop wieners, and now your Bazooka Joe 204. Can you maybe just talk before we get into kind of writing and how you approach writing, or just how rappers approach writing? Can you just maybe talk a little bit about sort of how you kind of hooked in with with that kind of crew, and sort of your early development, kind of as an artist?
I started freestyling and writing raps at 11. I'm from Churchill, Manitoba, which is way kind of a remote town in the north. You can only get in or out by train or plane. So it's very isolated. There's only about 900 people. But my older brother was like a break dancer in like 86 or whatever, and then taught me. So, I think my exposure to hip hop music and culture starts, sometime in the mid 80s. By the time I'm like 11, I'm dedicated enough that I'm starting to write things down and trying to freestyle, which is, improvisational rap. And then at age 13 or 14, we moved to Winnipeg. And when we got here, I immediately started looking, right? I wanted to see where the rap was at. So, and Winnipeg's pretty interesting for a prairie town. Like, we had a show called Spotlight that was on like cable access TV in the 80s and the early 90s, with like that featured local rappers and DJs and stuff like that. So I knew there was a scene here. And so immediately I was like, I'm going to find this thing. I'm going to pursue it. And I was pretty lucky to attend Sisler, which had like some rap promoters, and so quickly I kind of figured out the deal was there wasn't a lot of traditional access. There wasn't like a night or anything like that. So what was happening was under the guise of socials, which, for non-Manitobans are kind of party fundraisers, usually they're community based for like a wedding or a sports team or something like that. And that's also how you could get a party licensed in Manitoba, which had really archaic liquor laws. So what I pieced together from, people I was talking to and through the kind of high school kind of party scene, was what the promoters would do is they would get a room. Sometimes it would be like a grand ballroom, like in the Royal Crown Plaza in Winnipeg downtown, under the guise of it being a fundraising social for someone's wedding or for someone's softball team or something like that. And then they would just throw a hip hop jam in there. Well, it wasn't just hip hop; it'd be hip hop, R&B, and dance hall featured very heavily too, right? So yeah, quickly I figured out that you didn't have to be 18 to go to those parties. So, 15, 16 years old, out till 1 a.m, and usually the way the shows worked would be there'd be some, hip hop and R&B, and then dancehall reggae would come on towards the end of the night, which would get the crowd like most hype. And then right at the end, they might let some local performers on. And so that was like the culmination of the night, so I started going to those shows, and just kind of like, sussing things out. I figured out that kind of the most accessible groups were Freak Show and Farm Fresh. So these guys are pioneers of the scene. Traditionally, they're both groups, and there was another group called Mood Rough that's important to note. But they were probably 5-6 years older than I was, and I knew that Honeycutt, the DJ for Farm Fresh, worked at Sam the Record Man in Polo Park. So I went and dropped a tape there, and that tape made its way into the hands of the crew, and so they just kind of like recruited me. I was really green. I wasn't good at what I was doing. I was full of shit, I was taking credit for a lot of things I hadn't done yet. But one of the dudes in the crew is named St. Louis. He kind of acted as an unofficial photographer, documentarian kind of around the crew. He was a DJ and a photographer, and he liked the tape. I don't think anybody else did, but he liked it. And he kind of persisted with McEnroe, who's like kind of the head honcho. He makes all the beats. And eventually McEnroe gave me a call and said, "We think there's something here. You're doing it wrong. We want you to be honest about where you're from." I was kind of pretending to be from New York, not necessarily by outright saying I was from there, but definitely in like tone and swagger, and I was coming at it with the confidence of someone who didn't know any better, basically. And so that kind of pulled me in, and I was very lucky because they're often kind of lumped in with the punk scene in that era. It's kind of non-traditional rap. It was honest and from the prairies. They laid out to me the way to do it right in their, according to their ideology, which was, you can love this thing that's from another place, but you shouldn't misrepresent yourself in your efforts to participate in this thing. And that was, at the time, the best advice I could get. And they just kind of took me under wing and started putting records out with them. I believe the first one came out in '99. This is all kind of late teens, early 20s.
Sure.
And then that culminates in a solo album, and it just hasn't stopped since then. It just keeps going.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I came to the city, grew up in a small town, not as remote as Churchill, but a small town of like 100 people, like in Northwest Ontario. And I came to the city around '98. And so I kind of, and I came in, I originally was pursuing music in like grunge kind of and metal bands. And so like I was aware of Mood Rough being around, and like I was kind of aware of you guys, but not super interested in hip hop at the time.
Yeah.
But what happened was over the years, like especially as I kind of got, like I went to the University of Manitoba, I started working at the Manitoba, and so I got to meet like co-op and a bunch of and I started to like meet people a little bit that were floating around, and I started to get just more interested in like a broader range of music. And then like if you kind of like zoom forward, what I think is kind of interesting about like just sort of my like growing infatuation with like hip hop and rap is I started like where I really like got sort of obsessive about some of the stuff. Like I got kind of more into indie hip hop through the PNC. Like I became kind of fans of what you guys were doing, and kind of other Canadian groups that were kind of popping up and popping off at the time. But then I started to really just get more deeply interested in like the history of that music, and even in just more modern rappers where or even just more mainstream rap, I kind of got more interested in as I kind of started to do it went through university and did a PhD, because what I started to really weirdly learn was I was like sitting there, I would listen to like these songs that were, because of course rap started taking over the culture entirely, right?
Yeah.
Like in this sort of process, it starts to just eat the culture and
Literally
subsume.
just
Yeah,
consumes everything that comes before it, right? Like,
exactly. And
yeah.
like just subsume all other genres into it, right? You know, in a weird sort of way. And so all of a sudden, like I grew up like metal, industrial, like weird, like dark. I'm listening to like Danzig and stuff, right? And then all of a sudden, like now you've got Atlanta Trap, which is basically just Danzig, and but then they're rapping over it. You know,
Yeah.
like it's really interesting, like this industrial sort of minimalist beats, you know, like so what I found was interesting about it though, like from my just kind of perspective, not being somebody who's in that culture really at all, but just like a fan who's paying attention to it, is at the same time I'm studying literature in like a really serious and detailed way. Like I'm doing a PhD in literature and I'm looking at like a guy named Future is coming out. And you know, and Future's starting to hit big, and I'm hearing like criticisms of his writing style from
Mhm.
like my friends. So like, you know, and they're saying things like, well, you know, like he'll just say this, he'll like have a song where like he'll do 10 lines, they all start the same and then they end just he just kind of tweaks the ending.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at them like going, well, yeah, but that's a poetic technique called anaphora. Like that is a technique that goes back to Babylonian poetry. Like,
Right.
so like, you know, you might not like Future, but like the point is like this is a literary form in a really clear way. Even and at that point, like people had to have accepted already, like rappers are poets. Like that was a normal thing to kind of understand the culture. You got Kendrick Lamar, you know, up for the Pulitzer and all this stuff.
Mhm.
But there is still this sort of like, I think there still is this idea that, but then you have this other contingent of rappers, like the idea that it's just a subset of people are good and can write, and then everyone else is just sort of, you know, they're not really saying anything, or they're not really. But I find like, you know, I'm not the fan of everybody or anything, but like I find when you look at a guy like Future or Offset, who will often be very criticized for, you know, quote unquote not saying anything, on a
Mhm.
technical level, it's incredibly impressive writing. And then if you
Mhm.
actually move into somebody who's, you know, maybe more obviously saying something like Earl Sweatshirt, you know, who also has like a technical ability that's obvious.
Mhm.
um, you know, it's a bit more easy to see kind of the tricks, you know, when weirdly, like when Kendrick Lamar is doing something, it's more kind of easy to see what he's doing
Yeah.
than it is like when somebody who's kind of, maybe they're not talking obviously about something, but there's like a level at which what they're saying is informed by a larger context, you know, which I think
Sure.
is really interesting. So I just find it interesting because to me, there's all these like really complicated techniques. And I especially like, I started publishing poetry and like getting into this poetry world. And there's a really, and I started to really kind of fall out of love with poetry in a manner of speaking, because I would just constantly complain to my friends, like, well, look, you know, it's nice that it's a poetry book you're putting out, but like it's none of those poems are half as good as the average mainstream rap song
Right.
on a
Right.
technical level, you know, you know, and or like, where's the poem that's as good as like even the Darkwing Duck theme song? You know, when you're in trouble, you call DW. Like that's a
Yeah.
brilliant couplet right there, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested in like how rapping works on like a writing craft level.
Mhm.
So I'm kind of curious to know just sort of your take on like rappers as writers, or sort of how people look at rappers as writers or don't, and just kind of more about your own writing process.
Sure. I mean, yeah, what I would say is, you know, it's the wildest thing about looking at rap technically is to consider the part of it that is like, this is all almost exclusively like, you know, self-guided stuff, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like you are, there is no curriculum, there's no, you know, there's none of that. You're just, you're feeling it out, you're absorbing it, you know. I think it's important to talk about, at least in my development. And I know, you know, when I hear other rappers talk about, you know, origin story type stuff, yeah, like I think it's important to remember, like, this all comes along with like boom boxes and the first Walkman, you know, things of that nature. And I know, you know, as part of my development, it was just never stopping listening to it, you know, like big swaths of my, you know, late childhood and most of my adolescence with speakers literally strapped to my head. And the aesthetic in hip hop in that era too was to wear giant headphones, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so that's how you learn, you know. And then um, and yeah, I think it's really important to point out, like, someone like Future, I believe, I think he's from originally from the Dungeon family, which is
Yeah, he's
like,
connected to them. Mhm.
so that guy grew up in the studio watching Big Boy and Andre 3000, who technically are
Yeah.
both incredible writers and rappers, the physical part of it and the actual writing itself. Um, and yeah, it's it should be looked upon as really impressive when you consider that so much of it is just done by feel, you know. And I think there's definitely some things with race at play, where I think there's people thinking that, you know, rappers are, you know, like, especially from the hood, are kind of like preternaturally talented at what they do, you know. Like, there's this inherent thing where the reality of it is like, there are, you know, these are people who have put all of their chips into one pile and said, this is the thing, you know, like, in oftentimes very uncertain and sometimes dangerous situations. So yeah, it's for me, it's something that needs more credit and needs more examination.
Well,
uh
I think that also informs, or should inform, I think, how people receive some of the writing, but they don't. Like, I think of, I'm a big fan of Future, even though I understand he's not the best rapper in the world, but
mhm.
I just like the sound. Like,
Well,
he picks music I like. But like, he has this one song he does with Young Thug called "Drip on Me," right? And this song, at one point, the chorus is kind of all this drip on me. You know, at one point he's like, "Got to keep it on me like ID." And I think that's a really insightful line. Like, you know, people will look at like, oh, the show, the exuberance of, you know, showing off your wealth as being sort of a materialistic thing. But there is like a level out where, like, well, it is sort of a signaling of who you are on a kind of, you know, identity level, you know. Like he has to keep it on him whether he wants to or not. Like, you
yeah.
know what I mean? Like, it has to happen because that's sort of how he gets from one place to the other. It's like, he's, instead of being carded and having to show his ID, it's like, well, he's got that chain, you know, he must be rich, therefore he has a mobility, you know, that
Mhm.
he's now allowed. Like, there's levels at which, like, you know, or I always think also of this Takeoff song called "None to Me," where he actually starts the song with playing a YouTube clip from a guy who's looking at his music video and criticizing like the ostentatiousness of the music.
Yeah.
And so then the song begins with Takeoff going, "Yeah, I spend this money, but it's none to me. Like, it doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that I've brought everybody out of poverty with me." You
Yeah.
know, and like, there's an interesting like context, I think, that surrounds the music that sometimes doesn't really get like brought into it so much, especially by a mainstream that wants, on one hand, to celebrate and capitalize on this, you know, writing, but also wants to kind of dismiss its importance or value in a sort of weird double bind. Like, it's
Sure.
interesting to me. I'm curious to know, like, how that stuff matters to you when you're sitting down trying to write, like, in terms of thinking about how like the song is going to be received. Like, I think like Art School Kids is maybe kind of an example. Like, that's one of your new singles off Bazooka Joe's 204's new album is Perry Nilsson, which is going to come out in October. um, October 15th, I think you said it was.
Yeah.
And Art School Kids is one of the singles that's out right now that people can go find. kids with a Z. And you kind of get into like some of that kind of those class issues that kind of play into how people perceive, rappers, and just sort of, how class just plays into education in that sort of way, which
Yeah.
I think is interesting. So I wonder if you could talk maybe a bit about that song and kind of how you came to write that song, because it does sort of come off something you said almost like I never thought about it till you mentioned it, but like as a writer, I went to university and took creative writing classes, but there's no like class in like rapping, that you can go take at university. It's interesting how it's not been institutionalized in that way, even though it's gotten recognition. You've had people like Kendrick Lamar who have gotten recognition from the university and the academia in that respect. And you've also got, of course, a culture that is just dying to capitalize on rap music.
Yeah. Well, to go back, and I think I can tie it all in together, is, even within rap, there was judgment on your content, like, and for the kind of curators of the culture, there was a lot of like, this is about something and this isn't about something, and this thing that is about something has more value than this thing that isn't about something. Sure. Even if the thing that isn't supposedly about something is technically great, right?
I remember T.I. doing that really specifically in that one song. It's like one of his hit songs. He starts talking in like, all of a sudden he just starts using a bunch of 5-syllable words and saying other rappers are comedy, and dismissing them in this particular way. So it's interesting. I can see that real clearly in certain moments.
And what's really interesting about it is if you look at, the kind of eras of growth and focus and importance, New York became the arbiter of what's real and what isn't real for the longest time. They kind of not necessarily had exclusive ownership, because there was tons going on the West Coast at the same time. But if you go to what people look at as the golden era, the kind of early to mid 90s, New York gets, they start to really like the smell of their own farts. You know what I mean? Like, it's really self-serious, and it's battle. And, there's 50 dudes on stage every time anybody needs to rap. And it's just, it becomes almost like dour, and then you see, eventually later, when the South emerges and people started paying attention to the South, like one of the biggest records from that era is Paul Wall and Chameleonaire.
Yeah.
And and they're just kids, right? The album's called Get Your Mind Correct. And that album blew my mind on the level of, these guys are so obviously technically showing off. Like, they are all in on polysyllabic rhyme schemes. But the album itself is just a declaration of opulence. You know what I mean? Like, it is not only do I have, the vehicle of my dreams, right? Like, and in the South, it was usually like muscle cars and things like that. But not only do I have like this muscle car, but I have like candy color changing paint on it. And the rims like spin when I stop my vehicle. And not only that, when I pop my trunk, there's neon in there, and, a giant like sound system, and an aquarium, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And that's what was happening in the South, especially in a place like Houston, where it was like the hustlers and the rappers were competing in these, in these kind of shows of opulence. But that record is just as important and impactful as a Wu-Tang record or a Rakim record. But it won't carry the same weight because of the content. You know what I mean? Like, or at least in some eyes, it doesn't, especially in the arbiters of the culture's eyes, like, things are changing now. Like, I think people are getting a little bit more of a more holistic view. I think, like, there's more people tapped into a broader discourse around it, and there's been a little bit of time to observe it. But for the most part, the broadly held idea is that this Tribe Called Quest record is worth more than the Paul Wall and Chameleon Air album. Whereas really, if you look at the Paul Wall and Chameleon Air album, it is technically a masterpiece.
Well, and I find the technical thing. You talk about they kind of are showing off not just the opulence but the technical ability. I find that's a really interesting thing that you see a lot in a lot of, not to generalize, but you see that a lot in Southern rap as well. Like I always think of Big Crit, Cadillactica. You know that song. Like there's this great moment in that song where he goes Cadillac, lack, 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 Cadillac, too early for the hook. Like, he actually says, like, he stops himself and goes, wait, it's too early for the hook. Like he's just in such command of song structuring, that he's even just showing off, like, and teasing it at the same time. Like it's really interesting, I think. Those moments happen. But kind of let's just fast forward to like maybe not fast forward, but like let's just kind of move towards like how you kind of place what you're doing and how you see yourself as a writer and a song like Art School Kids.
Yeah, we can start from Art School Kids. Like Art School Kids on a certain level is me making a conscious decision to like illustrate class, you know what I mean? And just to be that declarative and say, I grew up poor, like I am, for all intents and purposes, a poor person. I don't own a house. I never have. I've never owned a vehicle. I don't have a credit card. You know what I mean? Like it's a different life for people who don't have money and don't know resources and how to access them, and when you get into the arts, especially, for me, I got very lucky because I was kind of taken under wing by these, by people who were veterans of music, but also like, knew what they were doing, like running a record label, for instance. So I had a stable place for the records to come out on. And for me, especially as a young person, I was okay with kind of, living hand to mouth because I was living my dream. It was like I get to go on the road and I've seen Canada from coast to coast and done all these things. And then, as time kind of passed and like when you hit 30 and you start looking around and wondering what the future is going to be like for you, it's like, wow, and then you hit 40 and you look around and the only people who have survived in the arts would have survived no matter what they had done. You know what I mean? You see that connections and resources and coming from a moneyed background is kind of, the arts are the realm of those people for the most part. And there's fallback plans, like there's a part in Art School Kids where I talk about, like people who can just kind of have a band for their university years and then they can just go and do something else. And it's we live in a world where people are told to pursue their passions, at all costs, like ditch your family, live in a Winnebago, like put it all on Instagram, right? Poor people don't have that option, and so yeah, essentially, it's a song about class in the arts, and what I've had to do to kind of survive in it, like including selling drugs and kind of couch surfing all over the place for years at a time, like so yeah, it's a declaration and an exploration of class in the arts is how I would describe it.
Sure. There's a line in that song which I love, which is turn your installation into a murder mystery. I love that that line, and it's a great example, I think, of a kind of line that is in a lot of rap songs, where it's like there's a real emphasis in rap on like jokes, but that like serious jokes, if that makes sense. Like the one I love the most is Big Boy, where he says in one of his solo songs, he says, I write knockout songs, you spit punchlines for money. It's got a great, structure to it. I like songs that are about themselves and like are about like the song I'm writing right now on some level.
Yeah.
or like how I came to write this song here, or like when you're listening. And I think like, so I'm curious to know how you write a line like that, and just how you like sit down and like write a song. Are you starting with a beat? Are you writing without a beat and then trying to like, you've got a bunch of material, you're trying to fit it into beats when you are looking at beats? Like how do you kind of just approach the writing process
Right.
yourself?
Well, yeah, I think it's important to say about Art School Kids. It's a 3-verse song, right? Like, just
Sure.
for the example of writing, it's a 3-verse song. The first 2 verses are very earnestly about, this is where I'm at. I'm 42 years old. I'm still doing this thing. I've had to be an absolute magician to exist even up until this point, right? And then the 3rd verse switches into a violent fantasy mode in which I am, taking vengeance upon the kind of snooty art community, right?
Sure.
So yeah, so in a song like that, I'm going where it leads me, right? And mostly now my process, because there's different things, like there's sometimes you get invited to the studio to write a collaborative song with someone, and then you go there and you pal around a little bit, and then you kind of write like a fun ditty about how good of a rapper you are and how bad everyone else is at rapping, right? Like that's one thing for me. And you'll notice this when you look at my kind of collaborative record. Is I started out in a lot of groups, and now I almost exclusively do solo stuff. And that's because I'm at a point where I want to write in a very specific way about very specific things. I used to be more inclined to let other people take the lead, and we would write, high concept stuff on the level of, hey, we think this song should be about this. My verse is going to be about this. Why don't you tackle this, right? And so, those are ways of doing it, but not my preferred way of doing it. And so my preference, I don't like to kind of hang out and spend a ton of time in the studio, which is a real staple of kind of like hip hop culture and rap, which is, just get into the studio, smoke blunts all day long, stay there for however long it takes to get whatever finished is finished. I'm just too old and not comfortable opening up in that way with people around. For me, essentially, producer will give me beats, right? I will sit down with the beats immediately. Within the first bar or two, I know whether or not I want to rap on something. Um,
What's the thing that, is it just a instinctual feel, or is there something in the kind of beat you choose? Like, do you recognize
it's
like things you're looking for, or is it just kind of
I mean, I'm
more
looking
about that?
I'm looking to be moved, right? And I can be moved by what I feel like is the emotion in the thing, or I can be moved by the actual technical, like the drums, for instance. That's a huge deal for me. So, just to give you an example, in the early 2000s, there kind of, was a loosely kind of formed prairie rap sound, right? And that involved a lot of kind of like sparse kind of acoustic guitar loops, or maybe like a piano loop. And these aren't like jazzy, busy, fun things like, like the sampled hip hop of the early 90s. Like I said, they're kind of sparse and minimal, very moody. And then a lot of like kind of slow, chunky drums, for me. That's the opposite of what moves me. Like, I'm looking for more intricate things going on within the beat. That's why I make so much music with McEnroe. Is he does so much stuff with the drums that it's like, it's inevitable for me. I start listening. If it moves me emotionally, that's great, but more than anything, I just start hearing the cadence. I start hearing the flows immediately.
Yeah, I think like
So
any time is kind of a song like that to me is the opposite of like, it's sort of like you're saying, it's almost the opposite of a lot of trends at the time.
yeah,
And it's just
because anytime is like well over 100 BPM,
mhm.
like this is a part of that kind of osmosis that I was talking about earlier, to me, and I can only speak to my experience, but it's like I listen to all types of rap from across the spectrum, from the most experimental out there stuff to the most mainstream stuff. Um, I always look for the more technical representatives. It just kind of happens naturally, as a craftsman, listening to other craftspeople. It's like I'm looking to be impressed, right? I'm looking to hear things that I haven't heard before, or to hear a new interpretation of things that I have heard before. Um, but yeah, it's all in there in the beat when I listen to it. Um, and if it prompts me to, immediately start like thinking, okay, this is something I'm interested in, then I'll kind of mark it down, you know. So a beat, like a producer might give me a pack with 20 beats in it. I'll sit down, listen to the whole thing, mark off which ones interest me, and then it becomes kind of a pretty traditional writing approach, or at least traditional as I perceive it, in that when I have time set aside for it, and when I'm feeling it. Like that's another big thing for me. I'm someone who's kind of you know dealt with addiction and mental health challenges for the entirety of my adult life, or adolescent and adult life. So I recognize productivity. Like I can feel it physically, and I can feel it build sometimes, even sometimes for days. I know, the gears are already turning, and I know, like, okay, I'm gonna set aside a chunk of 4, 5, 6 hours, whatever. I know I'm gonna have access to a quiet, comfortable space. That's another big part for me. I don't like having people around when I'm writing. And when I know that I have that time and that space, I'll sit down and then I'll just go at it. And um, traditionally for me, I'll usually get the inspiration, the propulsive part of it for me. I can usually get a verse and a hook out of it, and then my energy will wane, and then I'll move on to something else if I'm still feeling it. But that's what I need to thrive. That's the best conditions for me to write under, I guess.
Now, how do you write differently if you're in that other scenario you're talking about? If like you were thrown into if you were, say on stage and you've got a freestyle now, or
Yeah.
you're in a studio and you're doing it a collab and it's about quickly, working, like how do you actually write differently? Like what are the techniques or the tricks or the ways that you'd approach like just the writing process differently in that other scenario where you have to produce quickly?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a difference between, like, what I was doing 20 years ago and what I'm doing now, right? Which is, now I have a tighter grip on it, whereas back then I was kind of being led around on a leash, right? Like the main conceit of it is that this rhymes, right? Like
Mhm.
you can sit me down with, some avant-garde college ass kid rapper who is challenging the norms of rhyming within the realm of rap. But for the most part, the conceit of rap is that it rhymes, and so that informs it technically. So you already have parameters set, like, especially because almost all the beats are 4/4, um so yeah, when I was younger, it was just like, I'm just trying to make this thing rhyme, like, I know on the right side of
Sure.
the ledger, here are all the rhyming words. I never did something as maybe deliberate as like had a rhyming dictionary or something like that, but it was like, it was informed by the rhymes. Whereas now, um yeah, now it's more about, I'm looking for a theme, I'm looking to match the aesthetic. What does this beat feel like? And usually what I'll do is just throughout my daily life, if I see an interesting turn of phrase, something that interests me on a sign, for instance, or if someone says something interesting around me and it really sticks out, whether it's for, something like alliteration or just maybe the perversion of an idiom or something like that, then I'll jot those things down, right?
Sure.
And yeah, and if I'm sitting down to and it's not those ideal conditions, I'll kind of feel the beat and then just scroll through my notes and look for something that feels like it clicks and make that the very first bar. And then once you have that first thing, it's like it becomes like lucid dreaming at that point. You're springboarding from one idea to the next because you know, unless you're under duress, unless I'm writing to a beat that I don't want to write to or something like that, like there is just a natural propulsion and kind of springboardness to it, and
Sure. And if you've got a
it,
theme and you've got once you've got an end word, you've got a rhyme that maybe was the next thing, and you could keep doing that, or you could move off it, but you've got at least some templated structure to begin with at that point, which
exactly.
sort of starts to lead somewhere.
And and the beat will also inform it, like
Sure.
if uh if I feel the beat has kind of like a focal point at the end of a bar, like that might pull me in the direction of I'm going to establish a rhyme pattern, a flow for every bar, and I'm going to stick to it for the entirety of this 16 bar verse, because I know that the way that the beat builds and the most interesting part of it or the most impactful part of it is here. And if I like jump in with that and hit it at the same time and do it for the entirety of a verse, it will naturally grow and build and, become climactic just within that, because of the kind of hypnotic nature of being like, I'm going to ride this thing. You know what I mean? And
Sure.
not only am I going to ride it, I'm not just going to do it for 2 or 4 bars. I'm going to do it for the entirety of this thing. And it makes it something that people, whether they want to or not, the listener gets invested in it, right? Because they're kind of trapped in this swirl that pulls you along and rewards you at the same kind of surging kind of point, I guess would be the best way to describe it.
And then when do you decide, or how do you decide, or like, is it even I don't know what goes, if it's even a decision or if you're just kind of operating on an instinct here, but like what I find really fascinating with rap writing is when people establish a structure, like you're saying, and then just suddenly shift it. Like
Oh
all of a
yeah.
sudden they just switch it. Where like I see Offset do that a lot. I find Offset impressive for a couple of reasons, but one, he'll just suddenly radically alter what he was just doing, to the degree that it's, it can be, really startling in moments. And he also is very excellent with slant rhymes. A song like Darth Vader to me has like some of the best slant rhymes you can find. But I'm curious to know, like, when you do that, because you do it sometimes, like in a song, like my favorite song of yours is Long Money, where you kind of do the thing you were just talking about, but you do have sort of like this moment where you say, you kind of like pause and then you kind of like break the flow a little bit, in the sense that you pause, then you say, put him up like an obelisk, which is one of
Yeah.
my favorite lines. And then but then like the patterns that come right after that, they fit in the bars and everything, but they're moving very differently,
Yeah, they're kind of jumbled, like, and
Yeah, like you're
like
hitting the beats and
my
everything,
craft
but
battle, Castaneda, yeah.
mhm. So
Um,
I'm really curious about like how you decide when to do stuff like that, because I think when it happens, it's really effective, in part because you've been so stable before that. Like it's
yeah,
surprising, right? So it
it's like
kind
a
of,
it's like a combo breaker in like a
that's a good
fighting
way
game.
to put it. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can only speak for myself. There might be a shift in the beat that prompts that more often than not, though you're just writing to a loop, right? Um,
sure.
So it could be
Yeah,
any
and maybe
amount.
the producer's going to change it later or something, but
Yeah,
because you changed it. But
exactly. Like
yeah.
sometimes the beat leads you, most times the lyrics inform the beat because there's post production, right? You put
Hmm.
your verse down, then the producer kind of manipulates the beat behind it. But in a situation like that, it's just feel, and it's like it's informed by the beat, but it's also, I mean, it can be informed by like scarcity of rhymes too. Like it might be like, okay, I ran out of all those, I ran out of the rhyme to keep that going, right? So I'm gonna break it. Um, but it could be content as well. You know what I mean? It's like now I'm gonna shift gears. So the content is gonna switch with it, right? Like or
Sure.
the or the feeling behind the content. It's it can be you, like like one thing I really like is a rapper who's making a point and is hard charging, and then just takes a moment and just throws their hands up and just goes, like it's like the audio equivalent of like I digress, you know what I mean, like or I got carried away or something like that. But
Mhm.
you know to give you a semblance of an answer, it's dictated by feel, like it really is. It's um it's probably rooted in freestyling, in that like you're going one way and you're going with something, and then maybe you were doing 2-syllable rhymes, but now a 3-syllable word is at the end of the bar, and that might be the impetus for the whole change, like is a slight technicality rather.
It's really fascinating, to me, and I just find it really, interesting on a craft level. Some of the things that you do, and that just rappers in general do. It just is. There's just so many impressive aspects to it, and it's an art form where I feel like people will sometimes I sometimes will get asked, by students, what do they think? What I think is the most like poetic art, like music form or whatever. And I always will say rap is, just because if you took the music away, it's still music, on a really
Right.
basic level. Like it's just working with syntactical units in that really specific, melodic, kind of musical way.
Hmm.
Um, uh, well, it's been really excellent talking to you, Bazooka Joe 204, and I really, uh, want to just encourage people to check out your new record, Prairie Nielsen, when it's out in October there. Again, he's got some singles out now, Art School Kids, and That I Knew What For is out right now. Plus, you're also John Smith, like your older records are under the James John Smith, and
Yeah.
are out there. And I really encourage people to check those out. And I just, as a kind of parting words, I wonder if you have any like advice, writing advice for people who want to get into rap.
Well, you know because because there's so much cultural stuff to know. My first thing to say, and I would say this about any genre, right? Like if you're going to start a punk band or you're going to start whatever, would be go into the history of it, learn as much about it as you can, see if you can reach back to the older stuff and enjoy it. I know it's hard for younger rap fans to go back to what feels like kind of rudimentary stuff, but there's a through line through all of it that I think, especially if you want to get technically involved, would make a lot of sense to me. You know what I mean? Um, but more than anything, I would say I would give the same advice that I was given, which is especially when it comes to content, like be yourself. Like I want to hear about the real lives, for better or for worse. Like we're all gonna we're gonna zhuzh it up or whatever you want to call it. But what I would say is like, learn as much about it as you can, but don't feel any pressure to be what already exists within it. Um, and and by that I mean, if if you're like a teacher or a bus driver, or, you know, a nurse or whatever, and you want to get into this, I want to hear about your life as a teacher or a bus driver or a nurse. I want to hear it in rhyme form. I want it to be funny and engaging, and, you know, and like 9/10 of this stuff, I know we've talked a lot about the technical aspects of it, but I'm at a point where, you know, I'm intrigued by personalities. Um, and so, yeah, my advice would be to manifest your real life in rhyme form, to the best of your abilities would be the way to do it. And if you're going to go another direction, you know, like, uh, become the most fantastical thing that you can become, you know what I mean? But like, commit to the bit, see it through, and and give people an authentic view, you know, like open up the window, let people really see what's in there. um the you know, if there's one thing in the world no one wants to hear, and I have experience as a white person in rap music, is nobody wants you to hear you pretend to be someone else. It's not fun, and it usually ends in disaster, um, for many reasons. So
Well, thanks very much. And yeah, it's been great talking to you. And yeah, I'd love to have you on again sometime. So
anytime.
excellent. Thanks so much, Bazooka Joe 204, Joe, and keep writing the wrong way.